Good morning, friends. Good Monday morning to you all. Good to be here this morning as well. Excuse me one moment. Something I forgot to do. I didn't want to have a lot of sound coming through on that side or on this side for that matter. But good morning. Good Monday morning to you. Monday morning, 9 o'clock. And hopefully we won't have issues today with our streaming like we did last week. Excuse me, I got something in my eye and it's not my finger. Not my eyeball either. But it's today is episode 8 of PB Reads the Bible, our journey through Matthew. Don't know when our what number total episode it is, but it's number 8 on our journey through Matthew, and that means we're going to be looking at chapter 8 today. So thank you for joining me. Like I said last week, Thursday, we had some issues. I think it was Facebook, because I think everything worked fine on YouTube, but Facebook was giving us issues, and we ended up with 2 videos for episode 7. So if you didn't get the whole thing, you might have only watched a 15-minute video, or you might have watched a 10-minute video. You actually need to watch both to get to get everything that we spoke about that day. But hopefully that won't happen today. So far, everything looks good. I don't seem to be freezing up, so yay! Just a few things. Of course, go ahead and check in. Let me know who you are, who it is that's joining me this morning. The number is kind of low. So far, I'm only seeing 3. But I know busy week for so many people. So maybe you're watching some other time. Go ahead and you can let me know that you're watching anyway. Good morning, Cheryl. Yep, Sue just texted me about that. Your appointment got canceled. So glad you're able to join us, and I'll give you a buzz a little bit later on. Okay. But yeah, so go ahead and check in. Let me know say hello, good morning to me, to others. And it doesn't matter even if you're not watching live, go ahead and check in anyway. So I know I do go back in and look from time to time, a couple times a day, just to see if there's any comments, any questions in particular that I need to address. So you can go ahead and leave comments or questions on the stream. Knowing that sometimes I don't see it. Facebook doesn't show me them right away all the time. Sometimes I have to go back in and see them, but I will see them. For some reason, it does that. Sometimes it tells me, like, right after we end the video, I'll see 10 comments when there were only 6 there. You can also send me texts on things. So if you see me looking to my left, I'm checking the stream. If you see me looking to the right, I'm checking my phone for texting. Marcia's present. Good morning. Good morning, Marcia. Good morning, Marilyn. Good to have you joining us this morning as well. As we look at chapter 8. So I'm going to do a little background before we start reading. Matthew, because at this point, Matthew changes direction. He changes what he's writing about and how he's writing. The last several chapters, 5 through 7, were Jesus teaching, Jesus talking. And now we're going to move from Jesus speaking to Jesus doing. Matthew does that for a couple different reasons. Mostly, the biggest reason is Matthew showing different aspects of the Messiah. 5 through 7 are Messiah in word, the Messiah in word. And now picking up here in chapter 8 and running through chapter 10. Well, yeah, 8 and 9, basically, is the Messiah in deed. Messiah in deed, in action. He has not yet shown Jesus performing any miracles. No miracles have taken place in Matthew's gospel. That's about to change. And there is a key word that ties the 2 segments together. And it is used in the end of chapter 7, and then it will be used again in this next section, and that is the word authority. Chapter 7 ended, he taught them with authority, having authority, as one who had authority. And that is implicit and implied in the miracle stories, but it's also explicit, as they say. They say, who is he that even the waves obey? So he's got authority, and it's implied in other ways as well as being explicit. Okay, so Matthew uses threes. He uses triads. The great jokes and great stories are always coming in threes. There's always three people that walk into a bar, right? So Matthew tells his stories in groups of three. There's three miracles. Then there's a change in something. Then there's another three miracles, and there's a change. Now, and he's got three of those triads. However, he also inserts an extra one. He inserts an extra one because he needs to come up with 10. He needs to come up to the number 10. So you would say that one of the triads isn't really a triad. Scholars say it's a triad with an extra one thrown in. I don't. But he needs to come up with 10. Why? Why does Matthew need 10? As another way of connecting to Moses. How many plagues were there in the Exodus story from God, obviously that God used, but that Moses, I guess you would say Moses directed, that Moses prayed for to start or to stop, raised his thing. There were 10. There were 10 plagues to get the slaves out of Egypt. And so here Matthew has Jesus performing 10 miracles, all involving, we would say, all involving freedom, all involving freedom from something, this out, and ultimately for salvation. Okay, so let's get started, shall we? Chapter 8. And yeah, I'm going to be breaking them up into pieces so that we can talk about them as we go along. When Jesus said, however, we also need to remember that they're connected. They're connected. We shouldn't read them just as an individual piece, although we have to. But we have to remember that they are connected to each other, and there's a point as we go along. When Jesus had come down from the mountain, great crowds followed him, and there was a leper who came to him and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, if you choose, you can make me clean." He stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, "I do choose. Be made clean." Immediately, his leprosy was cleansed. Then Jesus said to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them." Pause. So we've got a leper. First and foremost, don't think leprosy like we think leprosy. Hansen's disease. Don't think of Hansen's disease. Don't think of the island of Molokai. And the priest's name escapes me at the moment. Who ran the mission there and contracted the disease himself. The word leprosy, the disease leprosy, as spoken about in Scripture, can refer to a variety of skin diseases. In fact, when you think back to the story in Exodus and Moses at the burning bush, he put his hand inside of his coat, inside of his cloak, whatever, pulled it out, and his hand was leprous, white as snow. That wouldn't be leprosy as we think of it. It's just some form of skin disease where his skin turned white, and that would be called leprosy, and the person would be unclean. That's the more important thing. Most of the forms of quote unquote leprosy, biblical leprosy, are not fatal by any means. However, they can be contracted and passed along from one to another. as a result, a person who had any of those skin diseases, I almost think of Mikhail Gorbachev's like ink stain on his head, is kind of like leprosy. Would probably be shunned because of that. But a person who was considered leprous wasn't just shunned. They weren't just shunned. They were not. They were dead. They were dead to society. They were dead to everybody else. They could no longer live in community. They could no longer live in the community. They had to call out, they had to dress particular ways with torn clothing and cover their upper lip and shout out, "Unclean, unclean," as they walked around. And so they had to live together, form their own community, which was limited in nature and away from everybody else. So what else couldn't they do? They couldn't participate in worship as part of the community of faith in particular. So much so that in the Mishnah, some of the other traditions that aren't scripture, a person who was cured from leprosy, they would use the same word. They would use the word resurrection. It's as if the person was resurrected back to life if they were cured of any scriptural leprosy, biblical leprosy. So, and nobody can touch a leper, and a leper can't touch anybody. So this guy comes right up, kneels before Jesus. There are multiple things to point out here just in this little passage. The leper came up and knelt before him. He's doing things he shouldn't do. He didn't yell out unclean, but he came up and knelt before him. That's a posture of worship. That's a posture of worship that you would do before a deity. So there's something there. And he uses that word Lord when he speaks to Jesus, which in Matthew is like only used in reference to Jesus. It is part of Matthew's Christian community. It's a word that they would use to speak about Jesus and to recognize him as the Messiah. So this guy is already using that special word for Jesus. It's the word of a believer. It's the word of a believer. And he doesn't beg Jesus. He doesn't say, make me well, anything like that. He says, and there's not a question. There's no doubt in the guy's mind. He doesn't say, can you? No. He doesn't say can you? He doesn't say if you can. His word choice, Matthew's word choice, is very specific. If you choose, you can make me clean. So this stranger, we might say, this leper it's a story of faith. The man has great faith. And Jesus says, I do choose. And again, Matthew's word choice is very, very specific and particular. It does have that connotation of God's will without saying God. It doesn't say God chooses to clean you. No, he says, I choose to clean you. So Matthew has Jesus saying, yeah, I can do this. I'm God. I'm God. Immediately, that's an important word, the leprosy is cleansed. Whatever his condition is taken care of, all good to go. And Jesus says, don't say anything to anyone, but go and show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them. So differences between this story and Mark's, because remember, Mark was one of Matthew's sources, and in Mark's, it's a little bit more. Jesus says, "Don't tell anybody," and then Mark says the guy went and told everybody. Matthew's word choice in Greek, yes, it says, "Don't say anything," say nothing to anyone, has a different connotation, a different understanding in Greek. It's more of a don't dawdle, don't bother, don't tell anybody, go right now to the priests. Jesus isn't giving him the command to keep it quiet, as is Mark's version seems to have that aspect to it. That's not what Matthew's concern is here. It's not a concern of don't tell anybody. Matthew's concern is don't tell anybody right now, because first thing you need to do is go and make the proper offering. Go show yourself to the priest. Person wasn't cleansed from leprosy until a priest pronounced them cleansed, and there's a procedure for doing that. And Jesus is telling them, don't waste any time, go right now and get that taken care of, as a testimony to them. Now, what kind of a testimony? To show that Jesus has power to heal? Well, yeah, probably, but more so that Jesus is concerned with being with following the law, with following the rules. If we remember just back a little bit, although he's breaking rules at the same time because he's touching the leper, but he wants him to go as a testimony that he is following the rules mostly. Okay, so he's following Torah. Jesus is being Torah observant. Jesus being Torah observant. Okay, let's continue then, picking up with verse 5. When he entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, appealing to him and saying, Lord, there's that word, my servant is lying at home paralyzed in terrible distress. And he said to him, I will come and cure him. The centurion answered, Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only speak the word and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority with soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and the slave does it. Pause. Should have paused earlier, but then that would have only been after 2 verses. In Greek, as in Hebrew, punctuation isn't there. Sometimes there are hints to what the punctuation should be. But many times you just have to go by the context rather than what those hints might be. And verse 7 and into 8, since the punctuation's not there, can be read a couple different ways. And the NRSV and I'm looking here, the NIV, both translated as a statement. I will come and cure him. I will come and cure him. However, in Greek, it can also be translated as a question, which seems to go better with Matthew's understanding and this breaking of the boundaries between Jew and Gentile. And it seems to be a better connection with a story we're going to read later when Jesus is hesitant to take care of a Gentile woman's request because she's Gentile. He said, I've been sent to the children of Israel. It might be better to read this as a question, like, I should come to your house? I should come into your house, into in particular, because that would not have been appropriate for a Jew to go into a Gentile's house. And if we read it that way, the centurion says, you don't have to come into my house. We can even kind of skip that, I'm not worthy, but although that might be part of it because of being Gentile. But you don't have to come into my house, which is a statement of great faith. You don't even have to come into my house. You can just do it from wherever. You can do it from outside my house. You do it from outside my house. And again, statement of great faith. And I did mention it as I was reading it, but when how does the centurion address Jesus? Lord. Lord, a word that's only used to refer to Jesus in Matthew's book, I believe. And in particular, it's part of his thing. Anyway, verse 10, when Jesus heard him, he was amazed and said to those who followed him, truly, I tell you, in no one in Israel have I found such faith. I tell you, many will come from east and west and will eat with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the heirs of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And to the centurion, Jesus said, Go, let it be done for you according to your faith. And the servant was healed in that hour. Pause. So this, again, is a story of faith by someone that they wouldn't expect to have faith. And Jesus commends him for his faith, not once, but twice. Twice he commends him for his faith. And he says, I haven't found this kind of faith in anyone in Israel. Now, some translate that not by anyone in Israel, but by Israel. And those who do sometimes carry on, because Jesus goes into that thing about, this eschatological banquet, and only mentions three. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob only mentions three, what we might say Jews at the banquet. And they'll say that's because Jews are abandoned from the promise. They're no longer part of the promise. No, and it's only Christians. And I think there's a word for that, super something or other. That's not what Matthew is saying at all. He's mentioning the big three. He's mentioning the big three: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Those are the big three. He's not saying that those are the only three. Those are the big three. That's all. That's all. Because when we think about Matthew and his whole theology and of who he is, or and the group that he came from, he's not saying only those three. Not saying that Israel is completely abandoned from the promise. All right, continuing. When Jesus entered Peter's house, he saw his mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and began to serve him. Pause. I'm going to pause. Every verb in there is Jesus is the actor. Jesus is the actor of everything that takes place. Jesus entered. Jesus saw. Jesus touched her. Okay. I think it's in Mark. I think it's in Mark's telling of the story, or the one that's closest to it. People tell him about the woman and that she needs help. He sees it. For Matthew, Jesus is the actor. He's the one that does all the things. Okay. And she got up, and it's immediate reaction. She got up and began to serve him. That evening, they brought to him many who were possessed with demons, and he cast out the spirits with a word and cured all who were sick. This was to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took our infirmities and bore our diseases. Pause. So far, and this might seem like a small thing, but it's not. He has not yet done anything with demon possession. He's going to in a little bit, Jesus, but Matthew doesn't tell any demon-possessed stories yet, but he slides that in there, that he heals demoniacs to pull everything together, because he wants to pull that all together into one thing. And he quotes Isaiah, and this is from Isaiah chapter 53. He says, he took our infirmities and bore our diseases. And we might be tempted to then expand, to go back to Isaiah 53 and expand. But Matthew's specific, in this case in particular, he's only taking that piece. If he wanted more, I think he would have wrote more. What he is saying is the context isn't that Jesus took these things and bore them himself. We can say that somewhere else, but that's not what Matthew is saying at this point. And he took our infirmities and bore our diseases. It really has the context of bore them away. He took our infirmities and bore our diseases away. He took them away. He healed. He healed. Now, continuing, verse 18. Now, when Jesus saw great crowds around him, he gave orders to go over to the other side. I wanted to get to the other side of the lake. So this is a story of new horizons. He wants the disciples, which is code for Christians, code for the church. So there's all kind of code in here, descriptive of what the church is going through in Matthew's time. A scribe then approached and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Pause. Now, this guy is described as a scribe. He's described as a scribe. He is not described as a disciple. Notice the difference. Notice the difference of what he calls Jesus versus what the leper called Jesus and what the centurion called Jesus. They called Jesus Lord. He calls him teacher, rabbi. In other words, this scribe is following the usual practice of seeking out a rabbi to become one of their followers, one of their disciples. That's not how it works with Jesus. That's not how it works with Jesus. Now in Matthew, Jesus does the calling. Jesus does the calling, not the other way around. And so he wants to follow Jesus. Jesus discourages him, because that's not the way it works. Another of his disciples said to him, "Lord," so this is a disciple. This guy is described as a disciple. So Jesus must have already called him. Let me go and bury my father." But Jesus said to him, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead." Pause. So this is telling us a couple things. Now, and I've done this before. We try to soften Jesus's statement because it sounds pretty harsh. It sounds very harsh. It says, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead." So you might have heard this passage spoken about, preached about in a couple different ways. I know I've preached about it in one way, that the guy is trying to delay. It's not like his father just died, but he wants to delay until the father dies, some indefinite time into the future. And Jesus says, "No, you can't do that." Others say that Jesus's statement has more to do with the spiritually dead. Let the spiritually dead take care of the dead. Both of those understandings, translations, however you want to say it, soften the blow of what Jesus says in this passage, and both are probably wrong. Let's read it. Let's read this one almost literally. Let's read this one literally from Matthew and from Jesus, that the guy's father just died. The Jewish law would say he needs to be buried immediately, within 24 hours. Within 24 hours. So he's not asking for a long time. He's not asking for a long time. He just wants a day to take care of this business. But Jesus says no. Jesus says no. Let the dead bury their dead. What Matthew is saying, what Matthew is having Jesus say is, nothing is more important than following the call of discipleship that I have placed upon your life. And that call of discipleship, where I'm calling you to be a disciple, you have to answer to every day. It's not a once and done answer to be a disciple of Jesus. It is a call that we need to answer each and every day without delay. And nothing, not even the death of a parent, can get in the way of that. It's a harsher one, but that's probably more in line with what Matthew was asking or is saying in this passage. So continuing, because Jesus, how did this part start? Right, verse 18. This whole thing needs to be read together. But so 18, verse 18, Jesus wants to go over to the other side. He gives orders, go over to the other side. He wants to try to get away from the crowds for a little bit, wants to go to the other side. So it's New Horizons, and it's code for the church to go there. So because the disciples are code for church. And when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. A windstorm arose on the sea, so great that the boat was being swamped by the waves, but he was asleep. Pause. In Greek, they actually use the word earthquake, which is interesting. I find interesting for a couple different reasons. I find it interesting because Matthew uses that same word in chapter like 26, 27, whatever it is, with the resurrection, that there was an earthquake at the time of the crucifixion, right? and the morning, whatever, something like that. I'm going by memory, which isn't very good today. It is a Monday. But the church, when we think of this boat and the disciples as the church, they went through earthquakes, and they were going through earthquakes at the time of Matthew, and they're being swamped, as it says here. So what do the disciples say? Because Jesus is asleep. They went and woke him up, saying, "Lord, save us. We are perishing." Now, this is different than Mark's version, because in Mark's version, it says, "Don't you care?" Matthew does not use that, because Matthew's point is that Jesus is with that first century church going through those earthquakes. And this isn't storms of life, although those are lovely metaphors, and lovely song comes to mind when I'm thinking about that. The storms of life prevail. That's not Matthew's point, because this isn't for individuals. This is the church as a whole going through these storms, but Jesus is with them in the storm. So they don't say, "Don't you care?" They say, "Lord," there's that word again, "save us. We are perishing." So it sounds like unfaithfulness, and yet it is faith. They know that Jesus can save them from the storm. And so here we see a miracle, the miracle taking place. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid, you of little faith?" Then he got up and rebuked the wind and the sea, and there was a dead calm. They were amazed, saying, "What sort of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him?" Pause. So there's that implied authority, that Jesus speaks with authority and acts with authority that even creation obeys. Authority that even creation obeys. Okay, the last part of chapter 8. So we'll just read the whole thing, 28 through 34, and then go back. Most likely. When he came to the other side, so they got to the other side of the lake, to the country of the Gadarenes, 2 demoniacs coming out of the tombs met him. They were so fierce that no one could pass that way. Suddenly they shouted, "What have you to do with us, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" Now a large herd of swine was feeding at some distance from them. The demons begged him, "If you cast us out, send us into the herd of swine." And he said to them, "Go." So they came out and entered the swine, and suddenly the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea and perished in the water. The swineherds ran off, and on going into the town, they told the whole story about what had happened to the demoniacs. Then the whole town came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they begged him to leave their neighborhood. End of chapter 8. Okay. So they get to the other side of the lake, and they get to the country of the Gadarenes. Your translations may use other words, and Gergesenes and Gadara, Gerasenes. What is it? I don't know. The point is, actually, nobody knows. Nobody knows what town it is, because some of the manuscripts say one, Other manuscripts say a different place. We don't really know. There's no sign saying, that this is the exact place. Well, there might be a tour agency somewhere in Israel that says, oh no, this is where it happened. They kind of do that. But if you translate it the one way, then it's a town about 33 miles away from the lake. So that might have been like the earliest translation. Others changed it a little bit to this other place, which is only about 5 miles away from the lake, away from the Sea of Galilee, and may have actually kind of had land going down to the lake, taking place there. However, the country's pretty rough, so for them to run off to town and back like pretty quickly isn't very likely, because that's 5 miles one way, 5 miles back, total of 10 miles. Not that they couldn't do it, but it's very rough, so it would make it highly, highly unlikely. So other translations throw in a third name of the place that nobody knows whether or not this place even existed, although, again, travel agents will tell you it does. That's right by the lake. I think when we get concentrated on those kind of details, we miss the points. So what are the points of this story? Regardless of what town it was. What are the points of this story? The points of this story are, it's not in Israel. Jesus has left Israel, left Judah, Galilee, crossed over the lake into this other place. What does that mean? It means it's to Gentiles. How do we know they're Gentiles? Well, because of where that is, because it's on the other side of the lake. And if that wasn't enough proof, we've got this big herd of swine, which is definitely going to be Gentiles running that, being swineherds. Jews wouldn't be swineherds, okay? So what are the differences between this and Mark? Because Mark tells, again, Matthew uses Mark as a source, and Mark tells this story. Oh, good morning, Annie. Mark tells this story as well, but there are some differences. Mark has one demoniac, but Matthew changes that to two. We'll see that Matthew often does that, where Mark has a story of one blind guy, Matthew makes it two blind guys. And in fact, actually, Matthew doubles the number of stories sometimes. I think there's only one story of a blind person receiving their sight in Mark, and I'm pretty sure there's two in Matthew. Those kind of things. He usually doubles whatever Mark puts in. So Mark has one demoniac, Jesus has two. A bigger difference between the two, and it's a theological difference, we would say, is that in Mark's telling of the story, Jesus and the demons, or the demoniac, get into a conversation. And Jesus says, who are you? What's your name? And they have a conversation that goes back and forth. And there's almost a negotiation or a deal. Don't send us away into the darkness. Just send us away. Let us go into there. And Jesus says, okay. And that's not what takes place here in Matthew. The demoniacs are virtually the only ones that speak. They say everything, and then Jesus just says one word: go. Go. And no, there's no grammar, there's no punctuation in Greek, but the way the Greek is written, we can read that and we can translate it with an exclamation point. Jesus was very firm in it. Go. And it happened immediately. A couple things there. Verse 29 says, "What have you to do with us, Son of God?" Okay, yes, they recognize him as the Son of God, as did Satan back in chapter 3 or 4, whatever it was, 4. So that's one thing, which it points out that the demons, that this is that conflict between the two worlds. They say, "What have you to do with us?" So at least that's how we normally translate it. And literally in Greek, it's "what to you and to us." What does that mean? That means, what do we have in common? We belong to two different worlds. is what it is saying, is what they're saying. Okay, what do we have in common? We come from two different worlds. So those two worlds coming into conflict again. Those two worlds coming into conflict again. So the whole town comes out to meet Jesus. When they saw him, they begged him to leave their neighborhood. It's humorous. So apparently they were more interested in their swine than in what Jesus might actually have to offer them as Son of God. Well, friends, that's it for today. We made it through chapter 8. Yay! That was pretty good. We'll do chapter 9 tomorrow. So we'll be back at this tomorrow, 9 a.m. I do pray that this has been beneficial to you in some way, that God has spoken to you through something I've said, something we've read. Maybe you learned something, or maybe you relearned something that you had known and kind of forgot. As you go through your day, not just today, but every day, keep those eyes and ears, physical and spiritual, open to what our living, active, loving God is doing in your life and in the lives of those around you. When you see it, when you hear it, first, say thank you, Papa, and then tell somebody about it. Be blessed, my friends.